Back now on the race, going deep inside the war room, focusing now on a piece by John Ibbitson of the Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail, who breaks down 4 reasons why the White House is still very much up for grabs and still anyone's game. We'll take you through his 4 scenarios, but back with us the panel tonight, Rachel, John, Pat, and Raihan. Scenario 1, Ibbitson writes, Obama will win because it's 1980. As wiser minds have observed, Ronald Reagan remained essentially tied with Jimmy Carter through most of the 1980 election. Mr. Carter was unpopular, but voters weren't sure Mr. Reagan was fit to govern. Only after his deft performance during the presidential debate did opinion shift. The Gipper took it in a landslide. Are we doing the same time warp again if Obama has a strong performance at the convention and the debates? Pat, what do you say?
I would say yes and no in this sense. Clearly, this race is about Obama. And if he performs well in the debates, he probably rolls on to victory. But you got to remember, David, Reagan-Carter debate was very, very close to the election. And when it tumbled toward Reagan, there was no chance to turn it around. Our debates now take place very, very early relatively. And I think you've got weeks of attack ads you can dump on a candidate after you lose a debate. So partly true.
Rachel, how do you see that aspect of it? And yes, we will have a number of debates here that will get pretty late into the season, but there is still that important question about acceptability for Obama, that issue of connection with voters that may take until later in the campaign.
Well, again, I think that if that is the question on which the election is turning, then Obama's in a bad position and probably won't win. If it's all about what we think of Obama as a person and whether we want to hang out with him and whether we identify with him, that's an election that he loses. Frankly, the election that he wins is an election that's about whether the American people really want to elect John McCain and whether or not they see John McCain as a continuation of George Bush in the last 8 years of Republican rule. I mean, Obama still has to work on the overall framing of the election to make it not about him, to make it about the other guy, to make it a referendum on what we've all been through. He's tried to do that this week very consistently. We'll have to see if it holds true through the convention.
All right, scenario 2 goes to McCain. Ibbitson writes that McCain will win because of Michigan and Pennsylvania. He writes this: Mr. Obama currently leads Mr. McCain in Pennsylvania by high single digits, while the latest Michigan poll has him ahead by only 3 percentage points, thanks to white, blue-collar resistance to his campaign. Sadly, Mr. Obama's race could also be a factor among these voters. If Mr. Obama loses Michigan, he will need to take Virginia, Colorado, and North Carolina from the Republicans to win. If he loses both Michigan and Pennsylvania, then he's probably toast. Raihan?
I think that's a very intriguing scenario. I think it's a scenario that the McCain campaign has to be looking at very, very closely. At the same time, I think it's going to be tough for them to pull it off right now unless McCain gets a more credible economic message. I think that that's something that's been dogging the McCain campaign for a long time because, frankly, that's not a set of issues that McCain is comfortable with. And I think that it's an area where Obama is trying to right the ship by actually trying to neutralize some Republican advantages on the drilling question. A new energy for America is the new Obama theme. I think that's very smart, and I think that's going to resonate with those voters to some extent. So McCain really needs to get back to brass tacks and figure out how to connect with those blue-collar working-class voters, go from beyond their cultural comfort with him, go to, I understand where you're coming from, and here are policies that are going to work for you guys.
And, John, is Pennsylvania really that close for McCain to pick it off?
Well, look, I mean, we're talking about a scenario involving Barack Obama losing 2 states where he is now winning. So, yes, he could lose those states, and if he loses Michigan and Pennsylvania, the writer is right. He probably is toast. But if you look at the situation right now, he's got an advantage in Pennsylvania. He's also got good opportunities, as Chuck was explaining, to pick up states that George Bush carried, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico. So he's got some, and Ohio as well, by the way. I think we overlook the fact that Barack Obama also has a slight edge in Ohio. It's very close. But Barack Obama has done much better than some people had expected there.
And again, it's a question in a state like Ohio, can he get beyond some of the culturally conservative aspects of the states and focus in like a laser beam on the message on the economy, which is where he really wants to win in a state like Ohio and like Michigan? Yes,
and David, it could also influence his choice of running mate. If he picks Evan Bayh of Indiana, the king of vanilla in Pat's terms, that could help him throughout that region.
Hey, look, David, you know what was the hot issue in Ohio between Hillary and Obama? It was NAFTA. The problem with John McCain is the Ohioans are worried about outsourcing jobs and mass immigration. These are hot populist issues. He could win Ohio, certainly on that, maybe Michigan and maybe Pennsylvania, but he's running away from those issues. So it looks very tough. I mean, Michigan and Pennsylvania look very, very tough.
Pat, if a voter is really energized on the issue of immigration right now, who are they going to run to the polls to vote for or against?
Probably Bob Barr.
I was just going to say.
Was that a setup? Was that a setup between you two? Move on to scenario number 3.
He's probably no good on that one either.
If Obama wins because of the youth black vote, this is how it's written. Pollsters and pundits underestimate the electoral shift that's underway. The turnout of both young and African-American voters is traditionally less than their actual percentage of the population, but both groups are powerfully committed to Mr. Obama. If they show up November 4, the Republicans are doomed. And that gets to a question, Raihan. This is why I asked the question of Chuck. When are we going to see some of the fruits of these voter registration efforts in states like Georgia, for instance, where they want to get the number of African-American voters to be much higher, or in North Carolina? That's where Obama's really got to tap all this enthusiasm among young people and his African-American base as well.
I think it's going to happen very, very soon, sooner than Republicans really appreciate. I also think that there's a possibility that Obama won't necessarily win these states outright, but at the ground level, in congressional races, it is going to make a big difference. There are going to be some big surprises because, you know, the key thing is for Democrats to get to 40 in places where they never could have gotten to 40 before. Once they do that, they can build on that. So I think that this is a very, very big deal. I think Ibnson's right to point out the possibility of a big surge in black turnout and youth turnout.
All right, finally, McCain will win because of Iraq and energy. Convention of wisdom holds that Obama should win the Iraq war issue because he was against it from the very start. But Ibnson argues that since, quote, the situation in that country appears to be getting remarkably better, voters may worry that a Democratic president would squander these hard-won gains through a precipitous withdrawal. To combat rising fuel costs, Mr. McCain's prescription of increased offshore drilling and a greater reliance on nuclear power strikes many voters as more pragmatic than Mr. Obama's dreams of windmills and fuel cells. Combined, a conservative electorate could decide that experience does indeed trump what one observer has called Mr. Obama's glittering generalities. John, it's interesting. I've been doing some research on independent voters for a piece that I'm working on, and we see in the polling that this energy issue is a top issue for independent voters who are clearly attracted to the idea of more pragmatic steps rather than some of the other alternative energy ideas that require a great deal of an investment, and for a lot of voters is simply out of reach financially.
Well, look, I think the energy issue has been working for John McCain. He's used it effectively. He's put Barack Obama on the defensive. But I got to say, I think when you look at the big picture, the glittering generality of change is going to be more powerful than any individual issue. And on Iraq, I still think that nets out for Barack Obama, even though it is less of a problem than it was because of the success of the surge. But the American people are very, very tired of this war. McCain's pollsters know that it's very, very difficult for him to win an argument about staying the course in Iraq because people are very tired of it.
Well, that's the issue, Pat, is that what McCain is asking of voters is a lot. He expects voters to know that he was opposed to Rumsfeld, wanted more troops, but still voted for the war, but then backed the surge when other people did and then was vindicated on that. A lot of Americans want to know why we went in the first place. That was the question I posed to Giuliani.
Sure they do, but they're up to date now. A lot of people are against the war. But I'll say this. The surge that Barack opposed is going to help Obama in the general election because people now say if the war is ending, then maybe Barack's position, bringing 16 months, maybe that's the right position. So I don't think the Iraq issue is going to help McCain. I do think he's done excellently on the drilling offshore, on the issue that he is much more hardcore, concrete, believable, whereas you do have these glittering generalities with Obama.
We've got new numbers on this. The Time poll that's out just tonight. These are new poll numbers we'll put on the screen on this issue of Iraq. McCain still got the advantage, 51 to 36%. Whom do you trust to manage the Iraq war? Rachel, quick comment on that?
If we're going to manage the Iraq war for another 100 years, maybe you want the guy whose idea that is. If you want to come home, you probably want Obama.